an oil spill, it's a race against time to contain the slick and protect the shoreline. This is what operations could end up looking like along the US's Gulf Coast. Hello and welcome to the Environment Show. As the first oil-covered bird was rescued off the coast of Louisiana, President Barack Obama warned of a massive and potentially unprecedented environmental disaster. This week we're in Brittany, a region that's had its fair share of oil-related catastrophes, for a look at the potential consequences of the giant oil slick that's lapping at American shores. First, we go to Alabama to meet the species and ecosystems most at risk from the disastrous spill. We'll take a look at the marshes and wetlands that are under threat and show you why these seemingly idle spaces are key to ensuring biodiversity. And we'll give you a glimpse of what could be to come. France has had to deal with its own oil disaster. We'll see what lessons the US can draw from the so-called Erica nightmare. But before we jump in, it's time for our news in brief.
The French Parliament has been in a spin about wind power. The ruling UMP party wanted to impose a minimum of 15 megawatts per turbine. The opposition said that would hamper the development of wind energy. The party backtracked. The Environment Minister, Jean-Louis Borloo, promised the construction of at least 500 turbines a year. There were concerns in Iceland that the recent eruptions of volcanic ash might have a negative impact on flora and fauna on the island. Horses and some bird species were considered vulnerable, but wildlife experts say all is well. A clean-up operation and rain is gradually washing away the ash.
Here in Brittany, regular training programmes like the oil spill containment drill that's taking place behind me are organised to prepare the French coast for the worst. But across the pond, the threat has never been more real. The US is bracing for the effects of last month's BP oil spill. And in the front line is Alabama, that's home to some rare and endangered species. Our correspondent Emmanuel Saint-Martin tells us more.
This was no ordinary fishing trip, and these are not fishermen but young scientists frantically collecting fish before the oil comes. They want to get a handle on the size of the fish population so that they can work out later just how many fish the oil has killed. Packed in ice and shipped off to Dauphin Island Sea Lab, a major research facility for marine animals, birds and plants, it's a race against time. Dr. Ruth Carmichael studies manatees at the lab. She says all the scientists here have been rushing to collect data.
People have been scrambling to go out and gather data now, even if it's not on a regular sampling schedule, to make sure we have preconditioned information that's really fresh and new and current.
This barrier island just off the Alabama coast is home to just 1,000 people, but has over 350 species of birds, many of which, like the stately heron, feed on fish and other ocean life.
That's an osprey. That's a fish hawk. They're the only bird that will actually dive in the water and be totally underwater to grab the fish. He'll come up out of the water and he'll turn into the wind and shake to shed the water.
The oil will make shedding that water very difficult, and de-oiling the birds will lead to many fatalities.
Even the process of de-oiling birds has a high mortality rate, because you're not only going to take off the oil that they encountered in the water, you're taking out their natural oils.
The sea looks clean at the shore, but out at the well site there are fears about the chemical dispersants being used. Plants and algae are affected too. Many larger animals and the water itself rely on subaquatic vegetation. The more scientists ponder the effect of this oil spill on the intricate food web that makes this island so unique, the more a sense of foreboding surrounds them.
Sometimes protecting the coastline means filtering the soiled water with whatever's at hand. Now, while some see wetlands as a wonderland for fauna and flora, others see unexploited land for farming and logging. So what is it that makes these marshes and wetlands so precious? Let's take a look.
In Casamance and Sine Saloum, the vegetation here is mainly mangrove forest. It has suffered from human destruction and low rainfall. Half the 75,000 hectares of mangrove have disappeared in the last 3 decades. A Senegalese NGO has begun a replanting program. 30 million mangrove plants have been planted over the last 3 years. Brazil's Pantanal is the world's largest wetland area. It stretches across the state of Mato Grosso and covers tens of thousands of square kilometers. It has the world's richest collection of aquatic plants. A sign at the entrance of the national park reads, "Pantanal belongs to humanity, protect it." And for good reason. If nothing is done to do that, it could disappear within 45 years. 17% of the vegetation has already been destroyed to clear areas for soil production or to raise cattle. There are 4,500 known species of fauna and flora in the region. A Brazilian NGO called SOS Pantanal was set up recently to protect the biodiversity here. The largest wetland area in France is in the Camargue, in the Rhone River Delta on the Mediterranean. Salt-tolerant plants thrive here. It's also a horse-breeding and rice-producing area and highly protected. However, it has suffered. Half the Camargue has been converted to agricultural and industrial use since 1950. Half France's wetland areas have disappeared over the last 30 years. They have either been covered with concrete or have been dried out.
So how can countries protect their coasts once the worst-case scenario unravels? In the US, thousands of volunteers have lined up to take part in the cleanup efforts. But even once the oil subsides, a new battle begins, a legal one. And in that domain, France is something of a trendsetter. It's a drill France hopes never to have to put into practice again. But just in case, the Centre for Research and Experimentation on Accidental Water Pollution, or CEDR, is standing at the ready. This week, the centre is training recruits on how to respond to coastal oil pollution. And it's as much a question of containing the threat as it is of cleaning it up. But as Christophe Rousseau explains, it's all a question of balance.
Our job is to ensure that our cleaning methods don't do more damage than the oil itself, which makes for a very delicate task, both technically and, as it were, politically, because all those involved, whether it be politicians or associations, all try to pressure us into leaving the damaged area squeaky clean. But it's also our role to explain that you have to let nature do its part and maintain its capacity to repair itself.
Today, the Atlantic coast has recovered from its worst environmental nightmare, the Erika. In December '99, oil tanker Erika sank off the Brittany coast with 37,000 tons of fuel on board. Residents banded together to hold Total, the firm that chartered the ship, accountable. French courts handed down a conviction for environmental damage, setting the legal precedent of ecological prejudice. A notion that goes far further than the American concept of putting a price to every damaged good.
If a trust, a public authority or an individual can prove they own the natural resource, then compensation is possible. The amount will be tailored to each case, but you won't see the kind of global compensation that followed the Erika case, on the grounds of pure ecological prejudice, a prejudice that refers to the natural environment, independently of whether anyone has a claim to it.
In the US, BP has already taken full responsibility for the situation. What's yet to be determined is the extent of the damage and of the cleanup. And once the oil has been picked up, this is where it will be kept, and it's also where we leave this edition. Thank you to our reporter Sylvain Rousseau and our producer Yong Chim. See you again next week.